Hello and welcome to Politics and the Past. This is your host, Robert Ferguson at the Center for American Institutions, and I am joined today by VIGs, very important guests. Caroline Downey from National Review and Daniel DiMartino, who's a PhD candidate at Columbia in economics and also with the Manhattan Institute and several other places. Both of our guests are from have several affiliations. Caroline, as I mentioned, she's a staff reporter with National Review that specializes in education and multimedia. So, does this make you National Review's Gen Z whisperer?
Sort of a Gen Z correspondent. And yeah, I like to translate the Gen Z habits, concerns, priorities for our older staff who obviously have so much wisdom. But Gen Z is kind of a conundrum these days to especially media, like modern media players. So it's helpful to have the Gen Z perspective.
I have this vision of like Jim Garrity coming at you with like a meme and saying, "Can you explain this to me?"
Yeah. Well, the good thing is a lot of my colleagues actually have kids who are Gen Z. So Jim Garrity is actually really plugged in to how Gen Z thinks because his kids
How
are
about Rich Lowry?
not so much. Not so much.
But I feel like National Review has a lot of young people.
Oh yeah, we know we do. So I mean, I think I'm the most Gen Z of the Gen Z staff writers at NR because NR has a funny reputation for having young people who are like 80-year-olds and 25-year-olds bodies. So they're like policy wonks and they're very scholarly, and I respect the hell out of them because I learned so much from my peers. But they don't they don't exactly talk like Gen Z, and I unapologetically do. I actually can't stop myself from talking like Gen Z. I can't really turn it off.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So, one of the other things that you do is that you work with Conservator magazine.
Yeah, so that's something I have on the side. It's a lifestyle brand for conservative women aimed at trying to counter the programming in Vogue and Glamour and Elle and Vanity Fair that have wonderful aesthetics. The problem is that they're also glamorizing ugly ideas such as witchcraft, cheapening adultery, making that sound like normalizing that, and a lot of other ideas. Teen Vogue, which has fallen, thankfully. We saw that recently in the news. Teen Vogue, I remember reading their issues growing up, and they would do profiles on the Democratic Socialists of America way back when. This is Teen Vogue. This is supposed to be what young girls are consuming for lifestyle advice, dating advice, fashion. It's like we didn't sign up for progressive propaganda, but that's what they delivered.
Right. Well, somehow it became like left of Jacobin
Right.
at some point.
It did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love what the Conservator does. I think their social media content is really, really good.
Well, all right. Let me ask you then, Caroline. So, I have a 4-year-old daughter and a 1.5-year-old boy. And this morning I woke up and I found what I think is a Jolly Rancher in my hair and something on my shirt that I don't think it was blood.
Oh.
So, do you think that there's any way by reading your magazine, even though it's more geared towards females, that I can find a way to make myself blend those looks to make myself look chic?
Oh, wow. Well, I think you may have invented a new cutting edge hairstyle, which is candy stuck in the hair.
And maybe blood.
And it may be blood. Yeah, I think you're onto something. Who knows? I mean, the left, what they think the standard of beauty is piercings and blue hair. And I know it's probably cliche to say at this point, but for them, ugliness is beautiful. Although not body positivity now is it's hollow apparently because of Ozempic, groundbreaking new drug, and help you lose weight almost overnight. Yeah, I think that exposed that the body positivity proponents were full of it because
Who was the actress that deleted all her old pictures of being overweight?
Amy Schumer.
Comedian, yes. She just deleted them as if we don't have them on Google anymore.
Yeah, right. I mean, Lizzo was the very proud obese queen in the music industry. This was her whole brand. She's on GLP-1s too.
Hmm.
Yep.
Well, I definitely learned something today. Look at that. And Daniel DiMartino, I mentioned that you're a PhD candidate in economics at Columbia, and you're a fellow with both the Manhattan Institute and the Young Americas Foundation. And you focus on immigration policy and the economy. But I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the Dissident Project.
Yes, so that is a speakers bureau that I started now over 3 years ago, where we sent immigrants who escaped from tyrannical countries to speak at high schools and tell our stories. I'm from Venezuela, and I thought, as I started speaking at colleges and high schools, first I saw the extent of indoctrination in favor of socialism at the high school and college level, and then I thought, I'm not enough. We actually need a lot more people who have different experiences, right? Because I don't have all the experiences. Somebody from Iran has a different experience from mine and a different value to add. Religious oppression that I didn't experience, for example. And I think Americans need to value their religious freedom. So what if I could just bring together a group of immigrants to tell their stories? And so that's what I did. And Young Voices, the nonprofit that sponsors this, is responsible for it. And now we have speakers from North Korea, China, Russia, Eritrea, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Cuba, so many places, and it's incredible.
So is it something that like an ordinary high school teacher can just organize
Yes.
or?
A high school teacher can literally go to the website dissidentproject.org and request a speaker. No
Excellent.
cost.
I do know that we have some school people who are in school districts that listen to this at least occasionally, and so I know they'd be interested in that. So hopefully
Yep,
we can.
they should definitely reach out. Just put the info on the website and somebody will reach out to them almost immediately.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for doing that. I mean, that sounds like a tremendous program. Um, so what I was kind of hoping in our brief discussion today to discuss was the way that Gen Z conservatives might be different, and maybe conservatives is the wrong word. Maybe the Gen Z right wing is different from earlier generations of right wing. Now, I actually did give Caroline a little bit more notice on this question than I gave Daniel. Daniel, you were chatting with somebody, so I didn't get a chance to give you this notice. So I'm first going to ask Caroline, maybe can you maybe give us your sense, big picture? We'll drill down a little bit more narrowly as we go along, but big picture, how would you distinguish Gen Z, the Gen Z right? You can call them conservatives, Republicans, however you want to characterize that, from perhaps earlier generations.
Well, I only got a little bit of advance notice because I thought of a case study, which is applicable here, which is Nikki Haley and Nolan Haley. So Nikki Haley represents the classic traditional Republican Party, the conservative movement. Obviously, she's an incredible steward and kind of pioneer of her time of great conservative, principles. And her son is much more, because he's Gen Z, on the new right camp, which is, I'd say, the two main ideas that they have rejected from their conservative elders are the idea that legal immigration is good and illegal immigration is bad, as well as foreign policy interventionism. So Nolan Haley, he has said he is different than his mom's kind of era of conservative politics, and that he believes we should have zero legal immigration, partially because of the Gen Z job market and the feeling among a lot of young people that they're already struggling and that they would be further displaced by even high-skilled immigrants that are brought in here. And then on the foreign policy front, young people, the claim is that they don't want to foot the bill for future foreign conflicts, and they also don't want to be deployed, and they don't want the country to get involved in quagmires overseas that may or may not serve our national interest. Whereas the old school philosophy of conservatism was that it's important for America to be the preeminent military force on the world stage, even a police force, you could argue, and peace through strength is all about making sure we have a great military prowess, and we're keeping up with our military, and we're also getting involved in conflicts when they're due. But Trump and his movement brought about the more isolationist, or you could say foreign policy restraint, and a lot of young people are buying into that.
Interesting. Daniel, what's your sense?
So I think that Caroline is right that there's kind of two strains. And I think the origin of this, by the way, is whether you're optimistic or pessimistic about the future. I think that's what really divides people. If you're optimistic about the future, I think it's more of like the Reaganism, kind of like strain. I consider myself part of that. I was inspired by Reagan since I was a kid in Venezuela growing up. I'm watching these speeches and all that. And that's why today I do what I do. And I'm generally optimistic, perhaps because I come from a country that is, very authoritarian, and I'm very grateful for America. But I think that a lot of people today have become very pessimistic about America's future, and you see it on the polls. And when you become pessimistic, your perspective on policy issues changes, right? You're pessimistic about whether the U.S. government can do things okay abroad. You're pessimistic about the reasons why you think the future is bad, so you need to scapegoat others. And I think that that's where the blaming of everything that's foreign comes from. So on the left, that pessimism expresses itself as the young socialist left, meaning we blame the rich for everything. On the right is we blame foreign countries, foreign trade, and foreign nationals, right? Immigrants. And so I think that that's the real divide.
Interesting. Now, just to maybe push back a little bit on that, I mean, I see a lot of pessimistic older conservatives too.
Okay.
Is there anything unique about the pessimism of Gen Z conservatives that might be a little bit different than maybe pessimism that I see in older generations of conservatives?
Well, I would say, despite the whole talk of, religious revival, I mean, Gen Z is much less religious than the boomers, much less Christian. And so I do think that religion impacts how you view things very much. And so, it also changes the boundaries of what you think is acceptable, right?
Okay.
I mean, how many, Democrat boomers support transgender ideology? Very few, especially relative to the young ones. I think it's the same for the right on a host of policy issues. I don't know. What do you think? Is religion the issue?
I mean, that's certainly part of it, but at least from the conservative boomers I talk to, they're pessimistic because of the young generation. But young people are pessimistic about you guys because they feel like you've left them the short end of the stick, whether or not that's true, and have locked them out of home ownership by enjoying the appreciation of their properties
To be fair, it's true.
into the stratosphere, which is true. And a lot of that was because of artificial government involvement in the mortgage market. And after 2008, just kept fueling, I mean, the easy money era kept fueling this meteoric rise. And now we feel like the barrier to entry is insurmountable. And so that's the real thing. But back to like the religious point you were saying, it was also a counterpoint to my own point. I was reading this piece about how, well, in a sense, why does Gen Z care so much about homeownership? They're not getting married anyway. They're not getting married. So like usually a rite of passage for young families is homeownership. But if there's no young family to have, because they're not interested in that, then what's the point of owning a home? Is a renter society really so bad if you plan on being independent and atomized with your cat?
Well, I think about it myself. Like, I can certainly, like, in the next year or so, I actually would be able to put a down payment and buy a home. But why, if I'm not married?
Yes. And he's someone who wants to.
Yes.
But a lot of young people, especially young women, have no interest in that.
But like for me, it's not an economic barrier.
No, it's not. But, also depends on what geographic region you're in.
Yes, of course. I mean, probably Manhattan, I wouldn't be able to.
No.
To be fair, most young families in the United States do not try to buy a starter home in Manhattan.
No.
That was never an expectation.
Not at all.
Right.
Not at all. And if you go to a rural red state, you probably would be fine. So
in Dallas, it would be perfect.
So some of this is hyperbole. It's like when we talk about the housing grief, about the housing shortage, it is real among Gen Z, but it's most pronounced in, of course, the very saturated blue cities where everyone wants to live because their friends on social media are living this glamorous, fabulous life as young professionals. And I have to go to Manhattan, I have to go to DC, I have to go to Chicago. And you really don't, but that's where their peers are.
Sure. And it's also where the entertainment is.
Sure.
Well, and also, like, if you are single, why would you move to a suburb?
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so because we have delayed marriage longer, I think that therefore you need to live in downtown cities longer, which
Right.
means you pay more in
Mhm.
rent.
And even if you live in Stamford, Connecticut, where I was born, you live in Hoboken, you know, there's better prices there for real estate or even rent, but you gotta commute in to be where the people are. 'Cause
Right.
I have friends who've tried living in the suburbs of Chicago, and
Mhm.
they hardly know a soul their age. And that's pretty disheartening when you're trying to
Yes.
meet a husband or a wife.
And I'll say, I think that it's going to get much worse
Yeah.
because as the share of the population that is young declines, it's like people don't understand. I mean, America is on the path, slower path than Europe, but of looking like Japan.
Mhm.
And it's very depressing. It's very depressing. Empty towns. I see it in Spain. My family lives in Spain now. Outside of Madrid and Barcelona, it's like dead. The country's dead. They call it the empty Spain.
Speaking of pessimism.
Yes, right? The demographic crisis breeds
Yeah.
even more pessimism.
I mean, I think in the United States, though, again, you have some of that now. If you look in wide swaths of the United States, not the dynamic parts of the United States that we've talked about. I mean, lots of criticism can be thrown at places like Chicago and lots of, Portland or Seattle or, lots of cities, but they're very dynamic places, right? I remember during the 2016 election, I was driving through Montana, and Montana's a booming state in parts of it, but not all of it. Right? And there's towns you drive through that you think, you know what? What's the probability that this town is going to be ruins versus the probability that it's going to recover? And you think that in 100 years, there's probably a good chance this is going to be a ghost town.
Yes.
And it's a legacy of one particular moment in time where the Industrial Revolution reached a point that pushed populations all over the map in the United States. But now, as the economy has changed and it's maybe concentrated where a lot of the major job markets are.
Yeah, I think the only way to reverse that would be to have like a very fast increasing national population rate, such that the smaller counties are not declining.
Mhm.
See, between 2010 and 2020, for perspective, the U.S. population grew at the slowest pace ever, but it grew. And most counties in the country lost population
Right.
at the same time that natural
Interesting.
population went up. But most counties lost population. So
Interesting.
that is almost inevitable unless you go back to the era of fast population growth.
Right. So, I know your work is mostly in immigration. I think that for most of the
But it's related to demographics.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
and that's where most of the political discussion is. But what you were talking about here is internal migration.
Well, it's internal migration, it's births. That
Yeah.
is, the biggest driver of this is just lower birth rates.
Yeah.
But immigration is also a part of it. The U.S. in the early 20th century had a much higher rate of foreign immigration. So it was similar numbers to today, but the U.S. population was about a third of what it was.
Right.
So the relative change in the foreign-born population was much faster. Obviously it's a different population, whatever, but I'm just talking about numbers here. And then add to that then you had the baby boom, so very fast also domestic population growth, and that led to a very booming economy, a very booming America relative to other countries.
But then the legacy of that is, if you've read Christopher Caldwell's The Age of Entitlement, is that this is where the baby boomers started to get the bad rap, is that first of all, it's Gen Z that's often accused of being the entitled ones. But as the book title suggests, the baby boomers as a group kind of did entrench the welfare state. A lot of the things that you associate with the fall of America, that was kind of their thing. So the baby boomers were spoiled, very spoiled.
Though I'll say, by the way, even the problems that we have budgetarily are also because of the lack of demographic dynamism. If the U.S. population, if the U.S. birth rate had never fallen below replacement, and we had the same immigration policies that we have had, like no change in any policy, we wouldn't have security problems. Like the system is actually sustainable as it is with fast population growth.
Yeah.
Interesting.
This is actually my biggest finding of my fiscal impact of immigration report, was that the biggest threat that we have is really demographic. Because think about it this way. Imagine we balance the budget. We add no more debt. No surplus, but no deficit. if the U.S. population declines and the debt stays the same, that means there's more debt per person. So even amid a no budget deficit, if you have a declining population, you need an ever larger budget surplus, which becomes even more austerity over time. So the demographic collapse is a very big threat.
Interesting. So where can people find that report?
It's on the Manhattan Institute website. Just look up the fiscal impact of immigration, Daniel DiMartino, and you'll find it on Google too.
And because, there's less young people paying into the system, retirement age keeps getting pushed further and further back. And that also contributes to this vicious cycle of young people feeling like they're once again sponsoring the older people, and they're not going to see Social Security probably in their lifetimes, even though they're paying into it in every paycheck. So it's like rinse and repeat.
Ponzi scheme.
It's rinse and repeat.
Sure.
It is a Ponzi scheme.
Which is why it would be sustainable if the population kept growing.
But it's not.
But it's still a Ponzi scheme. It's still a bad scheme.
And why would they? And again, just to play devil's advocate for Gen Z, why would they care about family formation if, one, the only people they could actually meet to date and marry are in these very expensive places, and it is expensive to start a family increasingly now.
For me, I think it's about the change in the culture. I think it's about the change in preferences, really.
Yeah.
I think it's not about the costs. People used to live in smaller homes. People used to be poorer. They didn't have access to the technology we have. I think it's all about preferences. The question is, what led to the change in preferences? Is it education that led to the change in preferences? Is it technology that led to the change in preferences? Is it the decline of religion that is downstream of that? What caused the decline of religion?
Well,
Also, why is America more religious than other developed countries? Why is Israel so successful at family formation despite being poorer than America? The only developed country with about replacement fertility. For all groups, by the way, like non-religious Jews, Orthodox Jews, Muslims.
Well, probably because they haven't, indirectly or directly renounced God from their kind of founding story the way, America is Judeo-Christian, has a foundation of that. But we, as a culture, have forgotten that. And I mean, the number of people who on the left will say there's separation between church and state in the United States. And I'm like, what founding document says that? And there is no such thing, of course.
Founders wanted
it was written in a letter.
State established churches at the state level.
Right.
Even the Supreme Court overturned that.
Yeah. But that's frequently their refrain. And I'm like, first of all, I would think that was casually in a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to someone. He mentioned it in passing. It's not like enshrined in our Constitution by any means. And to your point, if anything, founding fathers were really hopeful that we would have a vibrant religious people because this republic was not sustainable without virtue. And that's all, gone by the wayside because of secularization. So yeah, I think you're right. It's a big part religion, and as well, we're just decadent because of technology. And I mean, of course, it's lovely that we have economic prosperity, even amid this backdrop. America is still very prosperous, but decadence comes with costs. And
Though I'll say, I think a lot of people on the young right blame the economic progress. I've had these questions, like I had it at Franciscan University, a Catholic university, after my talk, whether I thought that the wealth is what's causing the secularization, right, and the decline of the social fabric, in which case it will be a trade-off, right, to have capitalism and social values. And I said no, because when you look at poorer countries than America, it's actually even worse. This will be a mind-blowing fact to you. Mexican fertility in Mexico is now lower than the United States for the first time in history. Mexican mothers are having fewer children than American mothers of all races.
Interesting.
But
Chile, Peru, Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, all lower fertility than the United States. There are countries that are not even half as rich as America.
So you're saying, okay, America is still more religious relative to other developed countries, still procreating more.
And even procreating more than poor countries.
But within just the socioeconomic snapshot of the U.S., though, the rural, poor Americans are having more children and they're more religious.
Yes, than people with bachelor's degrees, but not people with graduate education. It's actually a very interesting
That's weird, yeah.
But it's mostly driven by immigrants who are highly educated. it's a fascinating thing. When you look at native-born women, this is part of my on my research on immigration. Native-born women who have master's degrees or PhDs, they're not having children. Immigrant women who have master's degrees and PhDs are having more children than those who have just a bachelor's or some college.
Maybe it's because they've retained some of their
Really,
cultural
yeah,
teaching.
I also suspect it has to do with the fact that a lot of immigrant women who are coming to get their advanced degrees, probably a greater portion of them are married
yes,
than
they are.
or than
Much higher marriage rates.
right
which is
than
fascinating. The-
native-born women getting advanced
In
degrees.
the 60s and 70s, the marriage rate of immigrants and native-born was the same.
Hmm.
And then it began to decline since the 70s, but it declined at twice the pace for native-born Americans than for immigrants. And now there's a huge immigrant-native marriage gap in the United States.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of why we have all these studies that show that the children of immigrants do the best. Well, no wonder their parents are married.
Yeah.
Of
And-
course they do better.
And it colors this question about where is conservatism now? Has it mutated into a bad spot? Or is it just evolving to meet the times? You know, you think about, okay, America First is generally the zeitgeist, I think, in the conservative movement. But Daniel kind of offers great data to suggest that, well, it's not like the average American is interested in reviving American culture as much as immigrants who come. But
So we need to learn from that, I think.
we need to
actually.
learn from that. But I also think that, you know, you can care about more than just, you know, GDP and maximizing economic growth, and, you know, you could
Absolutely.
and still think about, okay, how do we take care of our native citizens who are also
But how do you do that without GDP growth and productivity growth?
Right. No, I think so. This is actually a very common statement among, like, I think some people on the new right, which is, you know, America isn't just an economic zone, which is obvious. Like, nobody's saying that. I mean, unless maybe some libertarians are saying that. But I certainly am not. I actually think, you know, family is the most important. But obviously, you need economic prosperity. I mean, the food doesn't put itself on the table, right? That comes from work and prosperity. But given that what we want is overall well-being, not just financial well-being, the question is how to get there.
But DeSantis, who I think he's kind of the great middle ground here, the compromise position between the new right and the classic conservatives.
I agree. I agree.
He said, I think it was recently, or maybe it was an excerpt from an old speech, was you can't just drop 1,000 Somalis in Ohio, even if they're legal, because it's going to disrupt the town. It's going to disrupt the culture and the fabric of that town. So is it good for the GDP of the town? Probably.
I mean, so what upsets me about that comment, actually, Caroline, is that nobody has ever proposed dropping 1 million Somalis anywhere.
Would it
actually,
happen during?
Not 1 million Somalis.
No, not a million. But like, even if it's like
There were
a couple
some-
hundred.
Yeah, well, a couple hundred probably wouldn't make a difference. But
Well, actually, I know. Just quickly jump in on that. So, when I was in Eastern Europe several years ago, right after the immigration wave of the refugee wave from the ISIS summer, that Gen Z probably doesn't remember very well.
no, I remember this. Yeah, the 2015
yeah.
Syrians
Right.
went all to Europe.
And I was amazed by everywhere I went. I never saw. I mean, and I wasn't in the tourist areas. I was going into the poor areas, and I saw I saw no refugees. Essentially, very, very few, if I saw any at all. And I brought this to the attention of one of my buddies who's from the post-Soviet space. And he said, yes, Rob, but you have to remember there was zero immigration here for almost 80 years.
So there was emigration.
Yeah, right. But
First culture shock.
right. So they, you know, you come from, I'm Canadian, right? And you're like, you come from a very multicultural space where you're so accustomed to diversity, right? These people have never seen a person with a suntan, right? And all of a sudden, it's a wave. It's a crisis in a
but
way.
there are a lot of problems to Europe. Let's be fair, because first there's the religious.
No, sure. I'm not.
Second, they do bring in crime. The immigration situation in Europe is very different than the immigration situation in America. Most crimes are committed by foreigners, especially most sexual crimes, most of really insidious crimes. And that's not the case with America. So that's why I actually think that we really need to separate that discussion.
No, for sure. And by the way, and this was before a lot of those problems manifested themselves in places like Eastern Europe. But what I was suggesting is that if you're from a town, a very small town in the United States, in a rural area, you probably have not, if you've seen immigration into the town, it probably has been fairly cultural homogeneous. If you're seeing a heterogeneous culture coming into town,
Yes.
that is going to have a different effect on.
And I think
on
the origin
perspectives.
matters too. I just didn't like the example of the Somalis because it's like, sure, like I don't think that the US should have brought the Somalis to Minneapolis on the refugee program. I think that refugee program is very bad in general. But I think that there's so many immigrants that can contribute much more.
That being
Uh,
said, it worked for a lot of
well-
Somalians who were a part of that.
I mean, it worked for them. I
Yeah.
don't think it worked for the US.
So.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, I don't know. I think DeSantis is recognizing, though, that there is a fervor, in the conservative movement to shut down the border entirely,
yeah.
not just to illegal immigration.
But then again, like Somalis are not what America is getting through illegal immigration. Thank God. It's
Yeah.
actually, Chinese, Indians.
Right.
It's people who speak English. It's people who have good, well-paying jobs. I think the situation he was referring to was the whole situation in Ohio with Haitians, not Somalians. Which, by the way, it's true. If instead of 100,000 Haitians in Ohio, you had dropped 100,000 Indians who were not on welfare, who were not committing crimes, who spoke English, I can assure you it would have been much less bad. Now, would it still have been a culture shock? Maybe. But it would have had a totally different economic and social effect, I think. So the characteristics of the immigrant matters. I think that's undoubtable.
Yeah.
Does it still matter at high skill?
I think it's a good thing to have high skilled immigration. I mean, how much?
No, I'm sorry about asking that. I mean, does the cultural difference matter when we're talking about high skilled immigration?
Well, the cultural difference is actually less sharp. So one example of that is the Pakistanis, the US versus the Pakistanis in the UK. I think I read that about 30 to 40% of the Pakistanis in the UK are married to their cousin. That is illegal in most US states. Pakistanis in the United States tend not to be married to their cousin because they tend to be physicians and college educated. Because the people in Pakistan who marry their cousin are the people who don't go to college. Okay? And the UK had a terrible immigration policy of essentially bringing in an insanely huge number of people who are not only religiously different, but they're also very low skilled, have, these customs of marriage that are terrible, that also, have genetic consequences because your children will be messed up, that the US didn't have, right? The Indians in the United States. A lot of people love attacking India nowadays. That's the other group that everybody hates on. Well,
Well,
Indians
space
in
opera
America
engineers.
are very different from Indians in the United States, and in a good way. Indians in the United States are selected from the top 5% of the Indian population that has a college degree. We're not getting people who are, defecating in the street, which is unfortunately the stereotypes I'm seeing shared. Find me an Indian that commits a crime that came here illegally. You will struggle. There is literally the immigrant group with the lowest crime rate. So, we're talking about reducing immigration when like the real problems that America has are what? Native-born crime in the Black community, let's be real. It is that the fact that low-skilled immigrants are outnumber high-skilled immigrants, and they're the ones who don't speak the language, not the ones that come on work visas. And and really all the crime situation is because of our own lack of enforcement, because of leftist DAs. And the housing issue is the housing supply. So it's like, it's the scapegoating that I just think is misguided.
I hear you. But Caroline, I wanted, you hit a really important point. I think that, DeSantis is straddling the kind of old and the new in conservative circles. And so just to go back to your point, when you mentioned that he's recognizing that this has to be accounted for in the conservatism of the future.
Yeah, and I think some, like him on the new right, are saying to what Daniel just said, we could probably walk and chew gum at the same time, not scapegoating, and I don't like that kind of toxicity on X either. There's no need to, let's be real, be outright racist, but you can advocate for, like you said, maybe a cultural reset. And I think a lot of people point, at least the ones who are more well informed, to that immigration kind of moratorium era. After, I think was it after Ellis Island?
Yeah, from the 1920s to after World War II.
Yeah, where it was like, let's let's reset here and let those that we did admit assimilate, which is really important. And then we can go from there and maybe at some point in the future open the gates again. But I think under Biden, America was at such a point where we were overflowing with unvetted illegal aliens in the millions. And of course, Trump is trying to deport most of them, not just the criminals, but those who are here illegally, and the optics of that have been a mixed bag, I think. But there's, I mean, and I think I remember watching that he was not even on record to match Obama's rate of deportation. So he was actually behind schedule at one point in deporting. So, I mean, there's so much to undo in terms of damage,
Right.
the assault on our national sovereignty that happened under Biden, that's why I think you're seeing some of the new right say, all right, let's just push the Overton window even further. We don't want illegal immigration. We want to reset the, to the zero before we started mass importing people. And then also, maybe we should limit the, quote, high-skilled labor from abroad, which I hear you. I'm sure.
I just think it's like economic malpractice. I think that, like how many high-skilled immigrants come to the United States on a permanent basis a year? It is less than 100,000.
But there's some data that suggests that we actually don't have a shortage of highly skilled workers in the United States.
You wouldn't have a shortage of anything. Shortages, I think that's a malpractice of like people on the left, especially, who say, like, oh, we have a shortage of this. We don't have a shortage of anything. Prices change. So you can't have shortages if there are no price controls. The question is whether America benefits. And I think America benefits when smart people from around the world come here and work here and are entrepreneurs, like Elon Musk were. And you might say, well, Elon Musk is the exception. Elon Musk was a college dropout who didn't know anybody when he came. He was not a high-skilled, proper, right? But he was a really intelligent person. And I do think that most legal immigration, it is low-skilled, and we should actually shift it. And I have a proposal in that report that I mentioned earlier.
Chain migration.
On how to shift it. Like, we should have much less extended relative immigration and much more high-skilled immigration, I think. But current levels of high-skilled immigration are very limited. The period that you mentioned from the 20s to the 1950s, most of the immigration that fell was actually because of the Great Depression. People didn't want to come. And then the war. People couldn't.
So it wasn't, I thought it was also intentional, though.
Yes, there was the country quota cap that essentially was because they didn't want Catholics and Eastern Europeans coming. And so that limited Italian, Polish immigration significantly, which ended up in Canada, actually, funnily. That's why so many of them went to Canada after the 20s.
Well, and Ukraine, too.
Ukraine.
We have the largest diaspora.
It was a huge mistake in that actually the people who would have come otherwise would have been Jews.
Oh, yeah. I agree with that.
And it would have been also like very intelligent Jews.
Well, and not just the Jewish population, but I mean, Poland, by reducing Polish migration into the United States, that put them in the right into the meat grinder of World War II.
Yes.
But I hear you. No, but I think, Caroline, that your point is very well taken, that that accounting for immigration, regardless of the economics, all right, throwing the economics out the window for a second, I'm sure there's good arguments, many of which, Daniel, you provided here, and I'm sure might be a couple of good arguments on the other side that are not represented here, because I think we're probably all generally in agreement on this, so we don't have somebody to offer that side, but the politics are not necessarily, and the culture.
Because my point is whether or not
stupid instead of the economy stupid.
It's true. I mean, whether or not the othering of immigrants is warranted. I mean, I'm saying like a leftist talking point here, and of course the economics matter immensely in the long run, because the GDP growth will help us all in the long run. But in the short run, which is kind of how politics revolves around elections, you have to think about cultural cohesion. You just do. And,
I agree.
And it's simply not.
And there will never be an opportunity to put forward the type of agenda, Daniel, that you've brought to the table here, unless you have buy-in from people who are innately skeptical right now.
And younger people are innately
Well,
skeptical.
I'll say about the culture part, I do think that that's the greatest challenge. The question is what's going to change the culture? And it's like, are the Indian immigrants destroying American culture, or is their education system?
I don't have the data in front of me right now, but you hear enough stories from young guys, and even though DEI is on the decline in
Yes.
much of the private sector because of the cues from the Trump administration, if not, of course, the mandates were at the federal level to get rid of those ideologies in the public sector. But you hear stories from young guys who said, okay, there's an H-1B worker here, and I'm holding their hand through training.
Oh, okay, wait. So this is an economic argument, not a cultural.
Well, no, it's a cultural because there's resentment. There's resentment that they have to work alongside the supposed cream of the crop that is not.
Well, what I heard was that they replaced him or something. I thought it was the economic.
Sorry.
Because you mentioned DEI. It's actually the Asians who are discriminated against the most
100%.
in favor of Blacks and Hispanics who are not high-skilled immigrants.
That's 100% true. But then on top of that, there's young people, especially white men, who've said, this job was filled by the H-1B program, which is somewhat fraudulent in its.
No, I think, yeah, I've heard that too. I just think it's wrong, the argument. It is.
That's not true.
Yeah, I mean, the college-educated workers have experienced the fastest wage growth relative to non-college, like almost every year.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't actually think, youth unemployment is extremely low. It's like recent graduates, everybody says there's this huge crisis, it's under 5%.
And as somebody who's going through the immigration system, and Daniel, you probably know that I think there is a general lack of understanding among native-born Americans how very difficult, bureaucratic, and Byzantine that process is.
Yes.
Like it takes months, like it takes
Years.
years. Well, I was going to say months to accomplish anything.
Oh, anything, yes.
Right. And years and years, and you pile months on months and months, and then years and
Even
years
for married
years.
couples.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And thousands of dollars on thousands of dollars on thousands.
Oh, sure. Yes.
And
well, see, I thought the Trump administration's compromise, was to allow the H-1B program to continue, but to make it so that employers would have to compete with salary instead of scrapping.
The one that where there's abuse, it's not where they are actually replacing American workers. It's these Indian staffing firms.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Which, by the way, 99% of their employees are Indian H-1Bs, so they're not even working alongside white people. And those Indian firms have definitely abused the system, and it's all because it's a lottery, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's the other argument, is that it's fostering an underclass.
Sure. All right. But you guys have any last thoughts on what distinguishes Gen Z conservatives and what people should be looking for?
I'll wrap up and say the grief is real. However, to Daniel's point, the data does dispute some of their fears. But as we learned under the Biden administration, you can say inflation is tempering all day long. American people may not buy it because cereal's still $7. So somehow you got to communicate to young people that, look, we get what you're feeling. However, statistically, you're still kind of okay, as Daniel's pointing out.
Yeah, I think the answer is the culture. Is we need, when people are not happy because, the friendship dearth too, people have fewer friends, they're more isolated, the whole loneliness crisis, all these addictions. Now, we have sports gambling. People are addicted to even gambling online. That's been a huge, by the way, mistake of a lot of Republicans to allow that to happen. I think we're on the same page. That is what's, I think, killing us. The technology that is making us compare to each other in ways that previous generations didn't creates more of a competitive environment that we didn't have before. And I think that that's what's leading to saying, hey, it's all the boomers' fault. It's all the immigrants' fault. It's all the rich people's fault. And that created pessimism.
So what we need is morning in America.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and Jesus.
Yes. Good point.
All right. Well, thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it.